Britannia, Britannia ruled the waves. Britons never, never, never will be slaves.
It's now 200 years since the decisive British victory over Napoleon at Waterloo ushered in the Pax Britannica, almost a century of relative calm and order in the world. Of course, it's also 75 years since the sudden collapse of France in the early stages of World War II left inhabitants of the democracy with the panicky feeling that they'd been asleep while tyranny and evil were mobilizing. But as we face a turbulent world, it is important for us to remember what can go right as well as what can go wrong, and to reflect on how so much of what we take for granted about the 19th century, from the Industrial Revolution to the peaceful independence of Canada to a general flourishing of liberty under law, depended on British supremacy in the world and Britannia ruling the waves. It wasn't always that way. When I lecture on American history and the founding of the United States, I have to remind my students that in the 17th century, the British were fighting wars with the Dutch on pretty much an even footing. At one point, a Dutch fleet sailed up the Thames and burned British warships. A century before that, Philip II tried to crush Britain like an insect. And of course, the British Empire comes in for a lot of criticism. People complain about colonialism and arrogance and bigotry, and yes, there was some of that. But it's also important to think about the ways in which the British used their power for good. For instance, when Barack Obama went to West Africa and he visited the slave stations, he talked about the struggle for independence against Britain. He never mentioned the Royal Navy's role in stamping out the slave trade, raiding West African slavers, almost going to war with Brazil over the issue of slavery. The shortest war in history, lasting about half an hour, took place in 1896 between the British and the Sultan of Zanzibar. The British sent gunboats, they shelled the palace into rubble, then they made the Sultan pay for the shells, which has a certain magnificent arrogance about it. But they did it in large part to stamp out the slave trade and abolish slavery in Zanzibar. So if the British thought they were the good guys in this story, they weren't wrong. Another of my favorite stories about British imperialism in the 1840s in the province of Sindh on the Indian northwest frontier. A number of Brahmin priests came to complain to Charles James Napier that he was getting rid of the custom of suti, as of burning widows. And they said, you shouldn't be interfering with our customs. And Napier, who's a good Victorian liberal, said, oh yes, I'm all in favor of respecting people's customs by all means. You have a custom of immolating widows, you go right ahead. We have a custom of hanging men who burn women alive, and we'll do that too. Well, that pretty much got rid of suti, and good riddance to it. Now, eventually, of course, the rise of Germany, the world wars, and then Britain ceded naval supremacy to the United States, but we got another Anglosphere power willing to use its might to try to preserve order in the world. And that has been a very good thing for us. And that is where it all connects up with a much older anniversary. It's 800 years since the sealing of Magna Carta, guaranteeing the rights of Englishmen that were so dear to the American founding fathers and Canada's founding fathers. Due process of law, security of the person, property rights, representative government, all these things that make a society flourish. And that's why when we look at Britain's rise to supremacy and the American rise to supremacy and Canada's role in the world wars, I want to recall something that John Quincy Adams once said. He was Secretary of State under James Monroe in 1823 when the United States issued the Monroe Doctrine, which formally said Europe hands off the New World, but was tacitly an agreement between Britain and the United States to keep continental Europe under control. When he became president, he sent a message to Congress at one point in which he said, liberty is power. And those are three very important words, because free people don't just prosper economically. They don't just have a flourishing culture. They're also militarily strong. All the things that make for dynamism in a country rest on a foundation of liberty. So as we face the threats that are all around us in the world today, it's a curious thing that in order to remain free, we must remain strong. And in order to remain strong, we must remain free. That is, our security against external threats to our liberty depends ultimately upon preserving our internal liberty, on remaining free at home. That's the connection between Waterloo and Magna Carta and where we are today and how we can meet the challenges and guarantee that 2 centuries from now, people are still telling a story of why freedom prevailed.